Well, hello and welcome to an on-site edition of the Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Travis and I are in a hotel in, where are we, Carlsbad?
South of Carlsbad, north of San Diego.
There we go,
Yep.
wherever that is. And we are going to be driving the Wagoneer S, which is Jeep's new EV. You will know more about that in a future podcast, though, because we are arriving today. We haven't driven it yet. But we do have a lot of stuff to talk about, including Toyota's new 4Runner. If you want to know about the Wagoneer S, you can actually watch the full video on that over on the main channel, because that's already going to be out by the time you're listening to this podcast. We're going to be doing a lot of comparisons with that RAV4, so stay tuned. Sorry, 4Runner. Too many fours.
I know.
And then we have news on the EV credits. Bad news, unfortunately. We're going to be talking about more software-defined cars. So let's just roll the intro and get into it.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
Alex, before we get too far, we have 2 new 5-star reviews. So I want to shout those out because the first people to put those reviews in are likely the ones we'll see the most of.
Yes, and if you haven't 5-star reviewed us, then where are you? Because, you know, you might get a shout out on the podcast.
And I have finally got my 5-star review in.
You reviewed
so I will no
yourself.
longer be shamed on the podcast.
Wow.
Yep.
Took him a long time, guys. So let's dive into it. Who's 5-starring us?
So our first one is listed here as the best automotive podcast. It says, Alex, Nick, and Travis are second to none. Their content is the most direct, informative, and entertaining in the automotive space. They're very knowledgeable when it comes to vehicles and make it easy for anyone to understand. I've listened to some episodes multiple times just because the energy between the guys is so positive. I wish the podcasts were longer, but easy to supplement them with their awesome YouTube videos at Auto Buyer's Guide. Keep up the great work. And unless you paid them and I don't know about it, I think this is from the heart.
One. So whoever Hey Matt is, wow. Thumbs up.
Thank you, thank you.
More of this, and you might melt our cold, dead little hearts.
Don't let it go to our heads.
I'm accused of being emotionless, I'm told. So
I've heard that
happens. And we have another one. We had not just one.
Yes, this is from Mouth of Madness. 5 stars, fun and informative. Alex became a trusted source on YouTube for an extended time. This adds Travis as a permanent addition, and it is a very good listen. Informative, genuine, current, relatable, and fun.
And it's out of the mouth of madness. So how could you not believe such a thing?
Hard to argue.
Yes, yes. Only out of the mouth of babes could be better. And speaking of out of the mouth of babes, we just drove some very expensive 4Runners.
Some very anticipated and very expensive 4Runners. And I think we've got some mixed feelings about it.
Yeah, and I should preface this by saying, guys, if you want to know all the skinny on the 4Runner, obviously it's the full video. But just up front, I like the 4Runner. I've always been happy that Toyota has kept such a thing around and been so dedicated to it when everybody else has abandoned the mid-sized body-on-frame SUV. And in a vacuum, it's just fine. It's the problem that when you go to a dealer, you're not in a vacuum anymore. You got to pay real money for this thing. So we should start there. Where does this start?
The starting price is not horrible, especially by today's prices. $42,220 is what you pay. That would be including your shipping, obviously tax and licensing not included. That's for your SR5. And that's not a bad starting point. The problem is, if you want to go anywhere beyond the SR5, things start to move pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was shocked by this. I kept assuming that I had written the number down wrong, which is why you and I were futzing with phones everywhere. I'm like, this cannot be right. We got to find a signal so we can double check my math here. But no, it is a shockingly large jump up to the next trim. So SR5 is the base model, relatively limited color palette. You get 2 smaller screens in the dashboard. So most of the shots you're probably seeing out there of the new 4Runner are big LCD in the dash. Huge. Let's be frank. Huge
that
LCD
center
in the dash.
infotainment is enormous, for
so
sure.
Big. And then a big LCD instrument cluster. But that is not what you get in the base model. You get a smaller 8-inch screen, and then a smaller, I think a 7 or 8-inch screen for the instrument cluster, flanked by some LED gauges. I don't think the look is bad. It's you know, a little 2020.
It feels like the entry point. You know, the center screen is probably not the one that feels the most entry point. It's that driver display.
You do get adaptive cruise control and lane centering, so the key active safety systems, no blind spot monitoring or cross traffic detection. You get unpainted mirrors, All the trim inside is relatively monochromatic, fairly basic. No floor mats, which I was surprised by.
That happens, but honestly, that one I'm not too worried about. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. Most people go buy floor mats that are separate anyway.
But if you should want some of these things, the next trim level up, and this is where hang on to your hats, guys, is $48,700, including destination. This gets you actually less than I thought. Like I was really scouring the list, expecting a kitchen sink full.
What did we miss? Was the question, right?
And it is a few extra USB-C ports, the Qi wireless charger, auto climate, leather shifter, floor mats, the bigger LCD instrument cluster, but not the bigger touchscreen in the dash.
Right there for the driver.
You get 20-inch wheels instead of 18s, I believe it is, and you get some really smart blue dash accents.
Very much so, but none of those prices include four-wheel drive. That's going to be an additional cost. So just at that point, if you're getting the Sport, the non-SR5 in four-wheel drive, you're already at $50,000.
Yep, and I will say before we progress further down this rabbit hole of pricing, that Jeep has been accused recently of really, really pushing the boundaries of what any human should charge for a Jeep. And now Toyota has said, hold my beer, we will do it with the 4Runner.
Which is a really interesting choice. Because the 4Runner, and specifically something like the Grand Cherokee, in my head the 4Runner falls between a Wrangler and a Grand Cherokee. The Wranglers can be tremendously expensive, but the Grand Cherokees can be more expensive, but they're nicer, right? I mean, they bring something else to the table. The 4Runner is not quite going that nice, but it still has price tags, not quite to match, but getting close.
And there are some ways inside where I think the 4Runner is not as nice as the Wrangler even. The top-end Wranglers now, you can get the stitched dash bits and this and that, etc.
You can get a really nice Wrangler.
Also shocking, though, the models we were driving were about $60,000 for the most part. Most of the 4Runners they had for us to sample, which they say are the volume trims, quite expensive. So again, $48,700, rear-wheel drive, what I would consider the true base trim. They said that about 5 or 6% something's going to be SR5. So really everybody out there is going to be paying at least 50 grand for this thing. If you want the hybrid system, which they've been really hyping up a lot, we'll get to that in a bit, you have to get the TRD off-road, $53,440 starting. If you want the limited trim, rear-wheel drive, this is apparently one of their most popular trims. It fills out like the largest share of the pie.
Which is really interesting for so many reasons, but carry on.
Yeah, that one is $56,850. If you want the hybrid, it's $2,800. And if you want four-wheel drive, it's $2,000, and you have to get four-wheel drive to get the hybrid. So it's $4,800 more than that $56,850 starting point, and still plenty of options. And there's also a Platinum on top of that, and then there's the Trailhunter, et cetera, on top of that. So it does get exquisitely expensive for a 4Runner that is, the modern Trailblazer.
And for me, the question is, what is a 4Runner? Who's buying a 4Runner? And to consider that the limited two-wheel drive is going to be a significant number of sales is almost confusing, because my assumption is that 4Runner tends to skew on the four-wheel drive side of things. That's what people would probably get it for, is the off-road capability. That's really what it's built and designed to do. You sacrifice some on-road things to be able to do that. So to get a two-wheel drive, I understand for some folks, but that one is really leaning into the 4Runner lifestyle and not the 4Runner use case.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the hybrids, all trims, are going to be four-wheel drive only. And Toyota wouldn't give us an exact split for four-wheel drive, two-wheel drive, but it has been going up because 21st century, everybody wants all-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. So those
no matter where you live, for whatever
dramatically
reason,
increasing. But I see this customer as the person that used to buy a Trailblazer for sure. Bronco, like back in the Bronco days that I remember as a kid,
and back
Bronco
in the old
2,
Trailblazer days.
Bronco 2 probably. I think it would have been the Blazer, not the Trailblazer.
Fair enough.
That came later. But that's where my mind goes. It's this customer that wants the everyday driver, but they want the truck thing, the truck experience, the truck durability and dependability, some ease of work on as far as mechanics, people, shade tree mechanics that want to work on their own vehicle, etc. Solid axle in the back, independent suspension up front. So the formula is pretty similar to the last 4Runner. The big thing that's controversial, and I know we talked about this a lot yesterday. Neither of us seem to mind too much, but the engine is going to offend a lot of traditionalists.
It is, and twofold, because it's either turbocharged or hybrid, which is
Or turbo hybrid.
or turbo. right, doubles up, right?
Yep.
But that's very different from what the traditional 4Runners have been. You know,
Mhm.
when the 4Runner could have had a V8, when that disappeared, it was like, oh my gosh, what's happening to the 4Runner? One of the reasons to buy it was it
Yeah.
had this big engine. What I appreciate though is that
Big, reliable, bulletproof engine.
correct,
Yeah.
big, reliable, heavy, unbelievably inefficient, ancient. But yes,
Yeah,
it
all
can be
those
all
things.
those things.
All those things.
But what we get, and you know, there's going to be a conversation about the hybrid and the why. And for a lot of folks, you go hybrid miles per gallon, and we really do not see that. But what we
Yeah.
do see is more power than you got on some of the more powerful engine options previously. Not just power, but also torque, which is really what a lot of off-road folks are going to be looking for, in a package that is as efficient.
Mhm.
Not necessarily more, but really as efficient as the standard engine. I think that's the new age power bump, is with
Yeah.
with electrification, using that electric motor for more power. Even though it's not making it more efficient, it's keeping it at the same efficiency and getting that power bump.
Mhm.
But it's not perfect in every situation.
Right, and we should dive into that one a little bit. So the numbers here, important ones for the limited trim is a good one to pick here. Limited four-wheel drive, non-hybrid, 20 miles per gallon city, 24 highway. The hybrid does not change the highway fuel economy at all. It's still 24.
Mhm.
It does improve the city fuel economy by 3 miles per gallon. 15% improvement's pretty good.
For sure.
You know, math wizards will of course tell me that's not 15%, but that's okay. We're in the neighborhood. That's fine. But the question, I think, for a lot of RAV4 shoppers is this 4Runner shoppers? I keep wanting to call it a
I
RAV4.
know.
Too many number fours
I know.
in this thing.
I know.
I'm apparently getting dad brain early.
The Sequoia 4.
Yeah, I'm
Anyway.
getting dad brain early. That's probably what's going on here. So, but 39 more pound-feet of torque, 2,700 RPM lower with a more aggressive first gear.
Yep.
So if you are the kind of person that love to take your 4Runner out on trails, if you really did go real off-roading with it, but you didn't want to mod it,
Right.
like a lot of 4Runner shoppers do, mind you, but
Yeah.
if you were the kind of person that just rolled a stock 4Runner out there on trails, this is a significant improvement just in the base drivetrain.
Right, and with the hybrid, you also get things like some more power on board to easily plug in your your refrigerator or whatever else you're taking it with you. If you're doing some longer trips, if you're going to do some overlanding, that sort of thing, that's built in. That's less modifications you have to make, and also more things that are generally going to be covered by warranties.
Yep.
Which is not necessarily what modders are worried about, because they
Mhm.
want the thing they want, and that's great. But someone who is if they're more mod curious and they want to dabble in it, that's a great way to do it without worrying about what happens if. And that's what the two Halo trims are for.
Right.
Right? The Trail Hunter and the TRD Off-Road, or TRD Pro, excuse me. Those are the equipment out the factory that says this is what it's built for. Go and have fun, and everything's covered by warranty.
Yep, and this brings us along to, of course, the Grand Cherokee, which really has to be the closest competitor outside of Toyota's internal competition, which, trust me, we'll get
Exists.
to in a
Yep.
second, because there are so many.
There are a lot.
There are
aren't
a lot of Toyotas that compete directly with other models. They
Mhm.
know their audience, and they're like, we want to keep everybody on board.
And they keep selling them, all of them.
No one is allowed to jump ship to another company because they want something a little bit
Mhm,
different. We got to get every corner. It's like General Motors in the 1960s. Every corner must be covered.
Right. I don't think I like this item. We'll flip to page 3. We have that item
Yeah.
with
Mhm.
or without. Yeah, don't
Mhm.
worry. We got it.
So we'll get there. But Grand Cherokee. So, and Toyota, of course, admits that Grand Cherokee they see as the closest competitor here. They both sell in big volume
Mhm.
for vehicles that are really off-road intended. But Grand Cherokee has always been, and Jeep hates this description, has always been a crossover.
Mhm.
And Jeep says, no, it's an SUV. It's designed for off-road ability. And I would argue it's actually one of the very few true crossovers we find, because it's a unibody vehicle that blends some car-like proportions and car-like construction with truck typical components. Once upon a time, it used to have solid axles, both front and rear. Rear-wheel drive still. It, of course, has a low ratio mode. We have the eLSD in the back, which functions effectively as a locker. But it's not quite as hardcore as Wrangler, so it doesn't have a front locker like the 4Runner does, so very co-equal there. But I'm rolling through the specs here just so we can all get on the same page here. So fuel economy with the V6, shockingly similar, almost identical across comparable trims. Very, very, very close. Obviously, there's no hybrid, but there is a plug-in hybrid. And that plug-in hybrid, even though the horsepower and torque numbers look similar, much faster because the electric motor is backed by a bigger battery, so it can deliver that power not just for a few seconds, but for many, many, many minutes going down the road. So 0 to 60 in that model of about 5.5 seconds instead of about 7 seconds for the hybrid 4Runner, and 7.4 for both of them. Interestingly, both almost exactly the same in the 0 to 60 department. Similar tow ratings. Both of them tow about 6,000 pounds. Grand Cherokee has a little bit of a bump. Keep in mind, of course, this is not much of a bump over Highlander towing, but 5,000 pounds in the average mid-size crossover there. Payload, surprisingly low in the 4Runner. That hybrid limited model we were driving, its door sticker said just 950 pounds.
It does feel like Toyota's been kind of right on the edge with their their feature set, and a lot of it has to do with weight.
Yeah.
Right. So same thing with the Land Cruiser.
And 4Runner is the heavier vehicle, which did surprise me a bit because Stellantis Jeep has been known. Stellantis is the parent company for those that don't know, but they have been known for producing some wickedly heavy things here and there. And Grand Cherokee is actually 200 pounds or so lighter in comparable versions, even though it has the V6.
Yeah.
Of course. Size-wise, they're about an inch apart. Grand Cherokee is a tiny bit shorter in terms of length. But it is about the same in terms of width. It's actually significantly lower to the ground because we don't have that frame. So the packaging efficiency is where Grand Cherokee really comes into its own.
Right.
Since there's no frame between you and the road, not only do you get more ground clearance in Grand Cherokee, you get significantly more headroom in the second row. And
which I can tell you is a bit of an issue.
Yeah, and significantly more legroom than in the 4Runner, almost 4 inches extra legroom in there.
And that includes the increase in legroom that we've got in the new 4Runner.
That includes that increase, but it does not offer a third row in the regular Grand Cherokee. You have to Grand Cherokee L for that, so it's included, guys, and across a broader range of different sizes too. And you give up about 10 cubic feet of cargo capacity. So 4Runner has a bigger, squarer cargo area. Grand Cherokee has the tighter turning circle. And then, of course, there is that plug-in hybrid model, which is interesting. Now, this is the one I was surprised by. How much weight penalty do you think there is for the plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee over the 4Runner?
When I was asked this the first time, right, it was a question of understanding that the Grand Cherokee is lighter than the 4Runner by a couple hundred pounds.
But then we get 25 miles of electric range.
But then you get a bigger battery, right? That's gonna
and a big motor.
Yep, that's going to substantially add some weight. My guess was probably a couple 100 pounds heavier. I was in that roughly 200-pound range.
Yeah, comparably equipped, we're talking 7 pounds. Heaviest 4Runner to heaviest Grand Cherokee plug-in hybrid, 4 pounds.
Under 10 pounds, and you get
Yeah.
a lot of EV range, which not everyone's going to be focusing on, but that is going to help in running costs in a lot of cases. And if you are out there, doing some very light wheeling, right? You're out there in nature. You can actually run the thing in EV mode, have a very different experience. It's surprising.
Yeah. And now I will say that if you do plan on taking your vehicle actual off-roading, I dislike the way that the 4xe system feels out on a trail. The engagement of the hybrid system is a little bit clunky to me, but the Trailhawk is now exclusively 4xe. It's the only way to Trailhawk. And similar drama in a way in the 4Runner because the design of these hybrid systems is actually very, very similar. Single motor, regular 8-speed automatic transmission, actually very, very shockingly similar. The 4Runner has the exact same sort of feel off-road, but it's muted by the fact that the engine's running almost all the time.
Right.
But when the engine does turn off and you're switching between modes, it's a little bit less smooth.
It's a small note. We kind of talked about these engines may be offensive to some on paper. I will tell you, out on the road, out on the trail, it's interesting because it does feel like they tried to tune the sound to be a little gruffer, to be somewhat reminiscent of a larger engine, and it
Doesn't
doesn't
come
sound
across right.
It doesn't sound bad, but they have not nailed that. So you
Yeah.
don't even, in my side of things, you don't really even get the quiet engine. You just kind of get maybe louder than necessary to be simulating or trying to match, and it comes up short. So at that point, I'd rather have it just be a little quieter.
Yeah, and that's something that we've noticed with this engine and everything else, right? So and we've commented this in Lexus TX and in the Land Cruiser
And the Tacomas.
et cetera, that the engine's just, I'm hearing a bit too much of it, and I wish it was quieter. It's less of a problem in 4Runner, much more of a problem in a Lexus RX or Lexus TX. Where,
Right. Different experiences are expected.
sounds very similar. The exhaust note, not a fan of that. It sounds weird. It sounds like someone dropped a 1990s Honda in a bowl of custard and it's still running.
I'm just gonna let you have that
Yeah.
one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm not loving it. Also, though, like I said, there's definitely some key benefits, though. So if we're going back to this Grand Cherokee comparison, we have the independent suspension in the Grand Cherokee, front and rear, which is not going to be every off-roader's choice.
Correct.
So if you want to do really rugged off-roading, you're going to want solid axles. You're not even going to want regular ball joints up front. You're going to want kingpins. You're going to want to go to that next level.
You'll be looking at probably another option, right?
Yeah.
The Grand Cherokee is not the
Not
top
there.
off-roader
Not
in
there.
the Jeep lineup.
But we do get more ground clearance over the differential. For occasional weekend warrior style off-roaders, I actually think I would prefer the Grand Cherokee with the air suspension. You get more clearance. You clear easier over center line obstacles over the differential because of that. Neither of them offers a front locker. And so that's something that you're going to find in, say, a Wrangler, Bronco, etc.
Right.
So there's that next level of capability in the Jeep lineup if you want to. I'm not so offended by that. I do think that for snowy weather, what a lot of people buy these vehicles for is inclement weather. You live down a dirt road, a gravel road, or you're in the snowy areas.
Yep.
The Limited trim, and this is, I think, why Limited sells so well, because Limited has a full-time four-wheel drive system.
Unless it's a two-wheel drive.
Unless it's two-wheel drive. But the rest of the lineup, for some reason, Toyota has not moved that full-time system into everything. It's really just Limited that gets that.
Limited.
You do get it, though, in some of the related Toyota products, which we'll dive into a little bit. But Grand Cherokee, much more availability of the full-time four-wheel drive system, which is much more capable of sending power around where it's needed. And so it's going to feel more sure-footed than the average 4Runner trim. This is something I see a lot. It rains, and there is some idiot out there that's like, I have a four-wheel drive. Now's the time to engage for low.
I am superior. Let me use my technology and the tools available.
Do not use for low. Do not use for high unless you are in a limited traction situation, everybody out there. So in reality, if you buy any other 4Runner, just like if you buy most trims of Wrangler, Bronco, etc., most of the more dedicated off-road vehicles out there, if you are not in a situation where you've got wheels spinning,
correct,
then you are driving a two-wheel drive truck anyway. Pickup trucks included, etc. That is the biggest thing I see. So if you engage for high, and the reason for people that are now scratching their heads, the reason you don't want to engage for high or for low, especially on country roads, in the rain, etc., is you need those wheels to spin at different rates. And a traditional four-wheel drive system that just has a transfer case that locks does not allow the front and rear to spin at different rates. And you will either see binding in a best case scenario, loss of control in a worst case scenario, and somewhere in between, added stress and wear on drivetrain components. And then your four-wheel drive is going to be broken. So don't do that.
Yeah. So I guess the question is, why do you think Toyota did not go all in on the 4Runner for a full-time all-wheel drive system?
That one's easy because there is Land Cruiser. And Land Cruiser is sitting atop the portfolio. And there is a bit more pricing overlap than I had expected.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, quite a bit. 1958 edition starts at $58,150. Regular Land Cruiser, the Land Cruiser, which is the weirdest trim name ever, $62,920. Very similar fuel economy numbers. Hybrid only. It's a tiny bit longer, basically the same width, same track, but it's like 1,000% boxier
Mhm.
and 3 inches taller.
Yeah, and honestly, it comes in, the pricing of it is fairly closely matched, like the Limited and the Platinums on the 4Runner. The thing you're going to get in that overlap on packaging is that you will have to pay more for similar equipment in the Land Cruiser. However, not everyone's going for the top priced
Yeah.
product. And if you plan on keeping this for a while, then it really is worth looking at what makes the most sense for you. And we were talking about it. They did have a Land Cruiser, nearby. I will tell you that second row is definitely easier to use for taller
So
folks.
much better. So much better.
Obviously, there is no third row, but that third row is an emergency third row, really, functionally. And I don't
It's
mind
very
that.
small.
I don't mind that. And I said I would go with a third row on the 4Runner because I would. But I think I would go towards a Land Cruiser because also for the same pricing, when you get inside and you sit in the driver's seat, it's a very different experience. So even like forget the out on the road and out on the trail for just a moment. Sitting there in the driver's seat, it feels nicer in that Land Cruiser. It is nicer, and even if you get more features in the 4Runner, it's not going to feel as nice to me, no matter what feature set's there.
The 4Runner, I mean, if everybody out there is wondering, what does it drive like? It drives like a Tacoma with 400 pounds of whatever in the bed. Because that's
a little more balanced, right? A little more rear.
Because that's exactly what it is. It shares engines, it shares the suspension design, it shares large portions of the frame design with the Tacoma.
Almost the entire interior.
100% of the interior in the front is Tacoma.
For better or worse, right?
Yeah. I think it's for worse because of Tacoma's price point. Because those interior components were designed for Tacoma's base price. And then we stick them in 4Runner and we get up to $70,000 basically in the top trims. That's where I think it falls apart a little bit for me. And in Land Cruiser, because it starts so much higher and it's not sharing with any of the lessers, it can be nicer inside. And indeed it was, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we looked at the dashboard and we'd driven it a while back.
Right.
And it was like, wow, I wasn't crazy.
And I will say, this is kind of a situation, we talked about it at the very beginning, the enormous infotainment screen, 14 inches, I think it is.
It's huge.
Huge. But for the Land Cruiser, for me, it's kind of a less is more situation. It's a smaller screen, but it's better integrated, and it matches the other screen, so there's less differential. And even though it'd be harder to see, some of the things I might want to sometimes, I would still lean towards that one. And again, you can go, we didn't spend really any time in the Platinum, but you can go to the Platinum, tap on the dashboard of the 4Runner, and go, oh, I just paid a lot of money for something that doesn't feel like I paid a whole lot of money for it in a number of ways.
It feels like a $30,000, maybe $28,000 car, something like that. The dashboard material is hard plastic all the way through the lineup in the majority of the dash in the 4Runner. And it looks like it, it has mold lines that I think aren't the best done for $70,000. Just fine for $30,000.
Sure.
Also much more reflective. And then we hopped in the Land Cruiser and it's got more premium materials everywhere, softer touch points, less reflective dashboard components for basically the same price. I mean, and this may sound like I'm bashing 4Runner. I'm not, because it definitely has its purpose. It's that theoretically more rugged vehicle. Like,
right.
If you are the customer that is going to off-road it all the time, and it's going to get dusty, and you're going to be wiping the surfaces.
You want that more durable plastic, for sure.
You probably do. If you're going to put, lumber inside and that's hanging out on your dashboard, you're going to want that. If you really want the biggest screen to see what's going on under the front tires using that forward view camera. For everybody else, though, I would just get a Land Cruiser.
See, the thing is, and again, this is going into this, I've never been a 4Runner owner. So I look at it and go, why the 4Runner? But the fact is, the 4Runner in 2024 was really, really old. And it kept selling in incredible numbers. And the owners didn't care. Ultimately, they didn't care that this was an outdated car.
Well, no, I would argue that it's not that they didn't care.
They've got it because.
I would argue it was a purchase reason at this point.
Right, and you could say it's because of reliability. This engine has been in this vehicle. You've seen the hundreds of thousands of miles that it's done, so that's what you're aiming for. You really like the body lines, and I'm with you there. It's a fantastic look. I actually think I like the last one better than the current one. Not that it's bad, but I think it worked a little bit better. But that was one of the, if I recall, it's one of the last expensive vehicles you could buy with a turnkey.
Yeah.
Instead of a push button, right? Which is just now kind of standard fare. But the whole point is, the 4Runner is not a on paper purchase. It is a how do you feel about it? What has this spoken to you? What was the last 4Runner you had? Because chances are you probably had a 4Runner before you bought a new 4Runner. I mean, there's just a lot of these folks coming back to it in a similar way to the Jeep, because the Jeep has never been the best on-road vehicle, but people still buy a lot of Jeeps, even folks who will never take it off-road, which is really what the Wrangler, excuse me.
Right.
I'm talking about the Wrangler.
Yeah.
That is the quintessential Jeep in my head. But people are going to buy a Wrangler and never take it off-road, and that is what a Wrangler is for in my head.
Yeah. And to frame this just for folks that are wondering here, so SR Tacoma, which shares a lot of the interior components, 4Runner, $31,590 plus the destination, so we're talking 33 grand. That's basically what this interior's target price was.
And your biggest miss on the Tacoma is second row. Obviously no third row, right? But second row space is significantly smaller. But if you're not using that a whole lot, it's for the kids, assuming you can make those child seats work. Maybe they sit behind the passenger, not the driver, or something like that. It's a similar product, and again, the price point. Right.
But I will say, Toyota has a whole lot of options to choose from, because we've got the Tacoma, we've got the off-roady versions of RAV4. Not going to do what a 4Runner can do. But more critically, we have Land Cruiser and we have Lexus GX. And these three are so close together in size, in capability, in power, because they're basically the same vehicle underneath. But Land Cruiser has that full-time four-wheel drive system that I really, really appreciate.
And what we haven't talked about, which I think is just worth mentioning, this is also the company. Like I said, if you look at any other portfolio, there are a few brands who can do what Toyota is doing, because you just listed off a lot of vehicles have shared pieces, which is great for everyone ultimately. But you also have a Highlander, a Grand Highlander, and a Toyota Sequoia sitting in the same space, and they sell. Obviously it's all split, but they sell enough to keep building three-row vehicles, and that's impressive.
Yeah,
for
and
sure.
it is bonkers, of course, that we have so many different variants of this body-on-frame thing, and nobody else is in this body-on-frame category party for them. Like, we've got Bronco and Wrangler. They're trying to be Bronco Wrangler pairings, right? With the convertible, the doors that come off, etc. And I will be honest and say that is the one thing that Toyota could have done differently with 4Runner that would have made me more excited than I am, which would be to bring us a 4Runner with easy to remove factory doors,
or even the front panel of some sort, right? If they said, hey, structurally we want to make sure that this stays one way, and obviously they're not going to sell a ton of them, but if you're trying to keep costs down on configurations, the ability to open it up a little bit would immediately it would make it more expensive than it currently is, but it would
Wrangler's cheaper, so not necessarily.
Well, but I'm assuming based on how they've built it, right? But it would immediately go, I don't care because
right.
Exactly. The Wrangler is not great on road. I don't care because these things immediately exist.
Could have been the reliable Bronco. That could have been their tagline, kind of thing. Like T-top, don't do the full off roof, do a T-top, removable doors, call it good. Would have been an interesting alternative.
Because they've still got the roll down rear window.
Yeah.
Right. They said never for just a brief moment. I'm not going to hold them to that necessarily, but they said that's here to stay, and that makes a lot of sense. You can't get that in the Land Cruiser. Even though the back window opens up, it doesn't roll down. It sounds like we're talking a lot about 4Runner, and the reason is because we've been looking forward to the new 4Runner for a very long time. We've got a lot of thoughts. Overall, it's going to sell a lot.
Now, are you team glass flip up or glass roll down? I think I'm team glass flip up.
I think functionally, if I'm going to use it, it is better to have it roll down. But I will say that I'm probably team Land Cruiser, and the fact that it does open up in any way means that I can utilize it, even if it's not if I have it open because I have some lumber sticking out the back. Well, I'm probably going to want to do a little bungee tie situation to keep it down. That's not as convenient as just rolling it up to where I want it. But the few times I
wouldn't roll it up with anything hanging out.
When it's rolled down, I guess is what I'm saying. When it's rolled down, you don't have to worry about it doing anything silly. It's secured. But the few times I'm really going to use that, I'm not too worried about it. If you drive off road and you've got the dog in the back, and or you just like the way things open up, you can do that, I guess. But I'd probably lean towards team open hatch, especially because it happens easier. I mean, it's a faster process. So if you are using it really consistently to load things in and out, groceries, something like that, so stuff's not rolling out, probably a little bit easier.
Let's see if I do have this photo. So,
oh boy. Are we going to put this on screen?
We may put this on screen. So if you're listening to the podcast, you may need to see this. And so, when you say lumber, and a lot of people say lumber, I think that's cute. You stick in like a little 2x4 in there.
I'm seeing it through the mirror here, yeah.
And then there is what I may or may not have done. It was a long time ago. I was much dumber. But
live and learn.
But hey,
how life...
you can put a whole deck's worth of lumber and a saw at the same time.
What year Grand Cherokee is that?
That was a 2000, so significantly smaller. It's the size of a four-door Wrangler today.
But could and should are two very different things.
Seals are what I'm concerned about on the whole roll-down window thing.
Oh, yeah?
Because they're more expensive and harder to replace, and I have just fucked up the door and window seals on my Grand Cherokee.
Sure.
But you can, they're like $12 and you just pull them out and pop in a new one.
Which is also why it lives,
Right. But
on the ranch, so to speak.
I think it's the glass flipping, it seems easier to me. But we should move on.
I think it's more usable, but I think it's for everyday use. But the roll down's cool. I get it. I get it.
And now let's move out of my brodozer phase into the EV credit news. Is that good? That's something you'd see there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
The looks I got driving that home, epic.
Yeah. Worth it? Maybe.
Here's the deal. There was a Home Depot like flash sale at this period in time. Home Depot had tried this like flash sale thing, and we had gone there for like one, I don't know what it was, one tiny little thing, right?
Pick up a new hammer.
And this is when the Grand Cherokee was still roadworthy, and needed a one thing. They were like limited time offer, whatever, like, and it was like an hour-long thing. It was like, if you do this thing in an hour, we will do...
Talk about pressure sales.
We will do like whatever % off in-store and 0% financing for 24 months. And I was like, we don't have time to go home and hook up a trailer.
Right.
We got to load up all the pressure-treated lumber for this deck now. Like right now.
Yesterday, let's do it.
We loaded up 2 full lumber carts, like to the brim.
Yep.
And then rolled it out and went, oh.
Did you buy some straps while you're there to keep everything? Because I saw it was strapped.
There were
were those part of the purchase?
They
it's worth it.
Probably were because it was strapped. There was lumber on the roof. There was lumber in the car. There was lumber everywhere. It was everywhere.
Yeah, rolling lumberyard.
As I recall, I may be incorrect about this. As I recall, there was a second trip because I may have abandoned Rob.
Yeah. Left him there to hold down the fort.
To hold the cart.
Yeah.
While I drove home and then threw lumber out the back and then went down to get some more. That we'd have
didn't have a different vehicle, just same one back because it worked the first time.
Same one back. Yeah, it didn't go wrong. But EV credit news. So bad news and not Trump bad news.
Just bad news in general.
Just bad news.
Yeah. So it turns out 2025 we do have different rules on that EV tax credit. They have officially been rolled out what vehicles are and are not eligible, and the lists have changed pretty drastically from are eligible to now are not.
And it is worth noting that, I think we pretty much universally expect the EV tax credit to eventually be repealed. Yeah. This is not an executive order capable repeal, seemingly, although there may be some executive actions that can be done around this. It will require an act of Congress, which, takes whatever that takes.
Yeah.
So if you are on the fence, you want one of these EVs that we're going to talk about, act fast, because
or at least consider acting fast.
Limited time offer. But Ioniq, big news here, and this is the surprising one. Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 9 that just got a credit just lost their credit.
So if you bought it in the 2-week window or whatever where it was available on sale, good for you.
Yep.
You probably get to keep it.
It sounds like they do get to keep it. It sounds like because the point of sale credit you get to keep.
Yep.
If you were not going to do the point of sale credit and you were going to file for it later, sorry, that seems to be off. It appears to be likely that this is related to the strengthening of import restrictions every year for critical materials and minerals, battery components, etc. from China. So we don't know because nobody has said specifically, and the EPA,
they won't.
Yeah, and the EPA doesn't tell you why. They because manufacturers have to certify. There's an independent process, whatever information submitted to the government.
Yeah.
So it appears that is the case. It is possible, however, that this could be like Volkswagen's last deal, where they were like, we don't know if we can be sure of this, so we're going to say no,
Yep.
and then we're going to go back and find out. And then they were actually able to get tax credits restored for some customers because turns out batteries were fine.
Yeah.
But that's the origin of this. It does mean total EV tax credit carnage, though. Ioniq 5, Ioniq 9, every Genesis EV has lost it.
Yep.
EV6 and EV9, though, get to keep it because they use different battery suppliers. General Motors is sitting pretty, actually Honda too,
Right.
because the entire
What a
Ultium
world.
family, the Honda GM Alliance there, that's what we'll call it, that is looking good. They all get the credit still.
Yep.
Jeep's Wagoneer S gets it, but not the Charger, which seems a little bit silly to me. Tesla, logically, everything gets it except for the two-row Model X and Model S, because the two of them are too expensive. So, sorry,
Right.
three-row.
Oh,
Except
yeah,
for the
yeah.
three-row Model X, because that's too expensive, and Model S is too expensive in every trim. So those don't get it. Rivian and Volkswagen lost everything.
Yeah, I think it's a bigger hit for Rivian probably
Yeah.
than Volkswagen.
And they only had half of it to begin with.
Yeah.
So, you know.
Yeah.
And the only plug-in hybrid left is the Pacifica with the full credit. So no Wrangler, no Grand Cherokee, no Corsair, no Escape, no Audi Q5, all gone.
I mean, talking about a survivor, that Pacifica plug-in has been a survivor for a while just to begin with in its existence, right? It's the only plug-in hybrid minivan that we get. They have not seen any massive changes, but here's a big incentive to go look at one because it's still the only one.
Yep. How old do you think that's going to be before it finally gets replaced?
Do you mean when do I think Chrysler's going to overhaul their lineup, and that includes Pacifica?
Are we talking Dodge Durango where it's going to be able to drink soon, or?
I mean, how far are we at this point?
I mean, Durango can already almost smoke. If you have an old, if you have a first model year on this generation, Durango, you're really close. You could probably buy cigarettes if it looked rough enough somewhere.
Yeah, I think Pacifica's probably got. Well, Chrysler's not in the best position to begin with, so if it keeps selling, they should just keep rolling it out, kind of like we've seen with many models, but also that the Nissan Frontier did that of late.
She's the only plug-in in the
I give it at least 3 years, and you know.
Oh, come on, Chrysler could sell that for another 6.
I'll be a little conservative there. At least 3 years.
They're promising, I think, something in 2026, but you know.
They'll tell us about it in 2026?
It was like, I think it was in some investor
because it's 25, if they tell us 26, then it could be delayed, not like we've seen any delays from Stellantis or anything. That could be delayed to 28, and then my 3 years would be right in that window.
They did not say whether it was 2026 or 2126. I mean, just the 26 part, that who knows, right? And, you know, one thing that probably still will be happening in 2126 is the discussion around software-defined vehicles, which I think we already ruled not software-defined.
No, not truly software-defined, but there's some. We had a few folks ask, you know, hey, what do you think about this after our first discussion? So kind of a carry-on. The biggest thing for me, and we are admitting these are not truly software-defined, but they are software-driven in such a different way. The big question I have is about some of these updates. And it's what we see in consumer electronics, namely cell phones. But all of a sudden, there's a new update, there's a new interface, there's a new look. We don't really get to choose whether those happen or not. And then all of a sudden, your home screen's different. And for some of our older folks out here, that is a lot more difficult to adjust to. I didn't say anything. But when we get to a vehicle, a lot of that's safety related. Right? You're expecting your speedometer to be in the same place, your maps to look the same way, and if you have to adjust those on the fly, that's probably a safety concern. So the answer to that is, instead of doing these broad sweeping changes that we have seen so far in every very software heavy model, your Teslas, your Rivians, that sort of thing, where they can change the whole interface. The thing is, if you start doing it where you can do it piecemeal, where you say, hey, Rivian has told me that this is what the new update looks like, and I can practice it and play with it here on my phone or on my computer and get used to it before I put it on my car. That would be very helpful. Or, hey, listen, there's something here about the font that really doesn't work for me, and I will hate looking at this. I'd like to not do the font. If we start doing some of these piecemeal things, we will lose almost the entire benefit of this software-driven piece, because it's not just about a font, right? It's a whole code,
Mhm.
and it's all meant to work together. So I think we're stuck at the moment with this all or nothing, essentially, because if we say, oh, I don't want this or this, number one, your average consumer is not going to sit there and pick these things apart. I also do think that it's on the manufacturer to put a good software package out there so that no one goes, I don't know where anything is, right? If they make changes, they really need to be kind of subtle over time. It's a good question. And I'll ask you this question. Do you think that things being added to a vehicle are problematic? And more so, what happens if a manufacturer takes something away from a car? Because that is something that's totally possible.
Yeah,
Whether
and
that
has happened.
and has happened. So if you bought a car that says it does X, Y, Z,
Mhm.
uh, should you have some protection that that vehicle will always be able to do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Eh, and it is tricky. So one of the related questions we got was, can you choose to get the update or not? And with a lot of manufacturers, you can. You can choose to turn off automatic updates. You can not pay for your subscription to the internet connectivity, the Wi-Fi, or sorry, the cell modem. You cannot connect to a Wi-Fi, so it will never even know that there's an update there, and you can turn the option off to not update. But then, of course, you're not going to be getting bug fixes and security fixes and other things that may be important, especially for a connected or a connectable system.
Right.
Security updates importantly there. But to your point, we have definitely seen features added and features taken away to various degrees of success, primarily on the Tesla side, which is logical. And this comes back to sort of this mantra of software-defined vehicles. Their capability, their ultimate future capability, past, present, and future, is defined by their hardware.
Correct.
But you can write software to change or tweak things or try and create new features in software using the existing hardware on the vehicle. So updatable is probably the best term for this. A universally updatable vehicle where the entire vehicle systems are connected, the entire vehicle systems from the braking to the head unit to whatever, work with one another, can be updated, and has the room and the processing power to accept these updates for some period of time. But like Tesla has resisted traditional rain sensing wipers.
I know it.
And for people that don't know, rain sensing wipers are pretty darn cool. They use a little diode and a little photosensor basically, and they reflect a particular wavelength of light through the interface, the windshield interface, back into the sensor, and they can tell when something's on the windshield.
They're about that big.
Yeah.
Yep.
About an inch in diameter, the whole module, super duper cool. Technology well proven, really well adapted to see what's there on the windshield, whether that's a drop of water or a mist or whatever. Tesla tried to do that in cameras because they were like, hey, we don't have the money for this thing. Surely we can see this because we're seeing the windshield out. Turns out it does work, just not anywhere like a regular
How
sensor.
do you define work? So as a everyday Tesla driver, let me tell you, most frustrating is that anytime I turn on autopilot, I do not have the full self-driving, just the free autopilot. Anytime you turn on autopilot, understandably, the car switches into automatic wiper mode. And I find out, or I'm reminded that this happens, because it is broad daylight and my windshield wiper goes off.
Yep.
And I immediately then have to go turn it off. But to turn it off, the easiest way to do that is actually to activate the wiper again. So for those who have stocks on their Tesla, you press the wiper button for the single wipe, or you press and hold, right, for the clean it. But you do the single wipe, and then you scroll the wheel down to turn it off. So I have then had to, very small complaint-ish, but I've had to wipe my window twice, a completely dry window, so that it won't do it anymore. And then when it is a mist, it'll go like it's a hurricane. And then when it's a hurricane, it'll go. It is the worst system I've ever seen. And my car says it has automatic wipers, and they're not automatic. They are trash. Right?
Tell us how you feel.
I can tell you how I feel.
I will say regular automatic wipers do get a little confused in dappled sunlight. So if you're driving down a forest road, and that light's coming through there, they may go a little haywire.
Yeah, this is a bad system that really doesn't work. But I have no recourse, essentially.
Yeah.
Except get rid of it. But that doesn't fix my problem.
No.
I like the car. Is there an aftermarket rain sensor? There isn't, right? And
There
they would
isn't,
never
no.
really be able to integrate it.
But this takes us to point number 2, though. And the reason they're doing this, of course, is because then they deleted a feature.
Yep.
Because Tesla used radar sensors for adaptive cruise control, which is why everybody called it radar cruise control for a bazillion years.
Right.
Now we're using adaptive cruise control.
Even though every manufacturer has a weird name for their adaptive cruise control, it's still adaptive cruise control.
And like everybody else, they used radar sensors because radar is still the best way of knowing how your speed differs from the object in front of you. It works day, it works night, it works
weekends,
generally speaking, in inclement weather, depending on how bad it is.
Correct.
Rain and fog will eventually cause a radar unit to not function properly, but those distance barriers and functional window, it's broader than a vision-based system, and much better in harsh lighting, because lighting doesn't affect it at all. And Tesla's used to have the sensor, but then they decided, well, we need to streamline our software. We don't want to use it in new cars.
Right.
But it wasn't simply new cars aren't going to get it. They're going to get the vision-based system, which does not work as well, especially in some of these challenging light situations, as people have discovered. But they're also going to disable the sensor for those that had it physically on their car.
So you have it, and it doesn't work. And honestly, it's the same thing for parking sensors, because the new ones do not have parking sensors.
Yeah.
If you had parking sensors, it's not using them anymore. It's now switched over to the cameras that are on board. So you paid for hardware that is non-functional at this point. Although it's still probably going to cost you more when you have to go get it fixed, because they go, that has sensors.
Yes. And I mean, bumper replacement's still going to be tricky, etc. So I mean, it is an interesting world. The parking sensors, I don't know if that bothers me quite as much, because you're moving at much slower speeds. They seem to work relatively well. How does your feel about that? Because you have one obviously with cameras. Versus other cars and tight parking maneuvers.
And I think mine was on the early end of does not have the sensors. So I actually appreciate not having the sensors and not having them work, right? I think the system works well. And what it has done in software is given you, the driver, a better idea of what it sees. So it creates a going to go nerdy for a second, but it's Lord of the Rings, put the ring on moment where everything looks fuzzy, but you have an idea where it's at. So you get kind of a top-down view, which is all digitally simulated, but it tells you pretty good where things are all at. But it's not a camera, and it's not a parking sensor, and I would trust a parking sensor a lot more, but I have not had any issues. So that is one of those things that they've transitioned over and does work. Does it work better than a parking sensor? Probably not, but it is close enough that I think we can call it a win.
Yeah, and this is ultimately that debate of should your product be set in stone, and that's what the rest of the industry had been largely doing. There were, everybody else was dabbling in this pool. Everybody was in the shallow end.
And they're probably doing a lot more R&D than we ever saw in the product line. But because Tesla was not basing itself off of any existing product line or really any existing models, they could and were successful in being a little bit more risky with it. Same thing we've seen with Rivian, is that they've been able to dive into this a little more seriously, because that was what everything was based off of, not having to adapt any old system or any old model of business to do it. But
and not having a huge team of lawyers telling people don't do that, I think, is the big thing.
And pros and cons.
I've always thought to myself, I think that the biggest innovation at Tesla has been the lack of fear of litigation.
Yeah.
Because that normally binds car companies up and makes them not want to do things.
You mean like having a full self-driving car that doesn't have a single sensor on it, besides, it gets an imaging sensor?
And even calling it full self-driving, calling it autopilot. Like Ford would never have done that.
And having a vehicle that'll drive itself through a parking lot to come pick you up with 0 drivers in the vehicle. Again,
Ford goes with dumb names because they don't even want it to sound, like Super Cruise. That's a little too super. We'll just call it Blue Cruise because I'm feeling blue inside.
Right.
I would like my car to steer.
It's one of those things, like with any level of advancement, with innovation, there have to be risks involved. Tesla has taken those risks, mostly almost entirely to its benefit, but mostly to the benefit of the consumer as well.
Yeah, the Tesla fans don't seem to sue quite the way that some others do.
And I will say the last thing kind of on this software packaging is that it's closer to, if you look at a Tesla and a Rivian and and a lot of other manufacturers, but these are the EV specific, very software heavy. Look at those like an Apple product, and Apple will do what they're going to do at the pace they're going to do it, and when they do it, 9.9 times out of 10, it works the exact way that it should, because it is such a we have control of every single piece of this, and everything gets switched over when it all happens. If you do it another way, it'd be like an Android, where you're looking at a more modular system that has to apply to a lot of devices, that considers a lot of things that can and can't be manipulated, and that's where it gets more complicated. And the reason I bring that up is because, number one, who's buying new cars? iPhone owners, right? And how many phones does Apple sell? A lot of them.
Yep.
There are a lot of other manufacturers building a lot of other phones, but they have more clunky software because they're trying to do more things with it, and they work within different restraints. That's why I think with this software, it's kind of an all or nothing. And
it is an interesting one.
And that's why when the software updates come through, you go, oh, I have a new feature, and you're excited about it, even though you really didn't get any say in the matter.
Yep. And there is a speed and flexibility that some companies have that others don't. So, it's like inherently there is nothing less or more software defined, quote unquote, in a Model 3 versus the EX30 that we just bought versus the Chevy Blazer EV long term that we still have, except that Rivian and Tesla will roll out software updates. It's like, oh, it's Halloween, we need to put little ghosts on our car. And there's a
Light
software
shows.
update, right?
Yeah.
And GM's like, you know what? I know that Google Podcasts was deprecated, I don't know, last century, and we're going to still throw it in our build because, it's old. Or known bugs happen. It takes them a long time to fix. Features still missing. But some of these companies eventually get there. Like, I was surprised and heartened, just out of the blue, that the Volvo C40, Volvo's been using the Google, Android Automotive basic operating system components for quite some time. And out of the blue, this last year, they were like, yeah, I guess we'll finally push Android Auto out there for whoever might use an Android phone. And it just popped up one day. Did you confirm it worked?
I did.
It worked.
Yeah.
Woo-hoo.
Although, it's one of those other integration pieces, which is why we see GM having scrapped Android Auto, Apple CarPlay on their EVs, except for the Cadillac Lyriq, right?
Lyriq and Silverado work truck.
Yeah. So
and Hummer.
Maybe.
I think Hummer. Yeah.
So by and large, have scrapped that integration because we're looking at the same maps essentially between the operating system and my phone, but the operating system is built in with the vehicle, and it knows where we're going and where we're charging, and that integration is not built there into the phone. So I took a trip, San Jose up to the Pacific Northwest, and then back, and at no point was I using my phone for the navigation. But then when I switched to my phone for my podcast and my music and anything else, then I had a map that was doing nothing, but a map in front of me that was based on the information I input. So it's not a perfect system, but
it could be doing it, because the Ford Lightning, we recently did this, Ford's new latest implementation of CarPlay now supports state of charge communications with CarPlay, so your phone will do the charge route.
So with Apple, where they have a much better grip on all.
I would assume that there is a future for Android Automotive. I'm sure some commenter will let us know, because you haven't driven the latest Ford infotainment system.
No.
And I don't have an Android phone.
Not with an EV. Yeah.
So we'll figure this out. I'm sure someone will correct us down there if we've gotten this wrong. But I believe it is an iOS only feature at the moment.
And of course it's coming, but it's going to come a little bit slower because there's so many other things you have to factor in.
I will say it worked really quite well.
Good.
The range prediction was, I think, more accurate than Ford's internal range prediction, which I think is a little sad, actually.
Yeah, that's actually
but
confusing, but anyway.
And the Apple Maps took me to Tesla superchargers.
Okay.
And the Ford app did not.
Interesting.
Even though Ford is the only one with plug-in charge at Teslas, they're the first one there at Tesla stations.
They were the first. They are almost, in my head, single-handedly the reason the whole automotive industry in North America has switched the NACS J3400 connector, because Ford said, we'll do it. And Ford's big, in case anyone's wondering. So It's a big shift.
Yep, pretty much that is it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Yep.
Goodness.
And with that, I think we're down an episode, and we must attempt to get to dinner now. So hopefully everybody has had a great week. Hopefully our listeners in Southern California are staying safe. We're down here in San Diego, and the fires are still raging up there. And there were actually some fires yesterday, real close to here. So it has been 9 months since they've had more than 1/10 of an inch of rain here.
Yeah.
So it is very, very, very dry and very windy, and it's kind of creepy actually because it's January and it should not be this dry.
Not normal. It's the fire season question.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I mean, I think fire season sadly is every season down here.
Yep.
And I'm not being flippant because I live in Northern California where we still have a very solid fire season, and it's not quite this dry, but it's not wet.
Yep.
So hopefully everybody's doing well out there. Make sure and fund the Red Cross and do all the things to support people out where they are. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so, and share this podcast because we are not asking people to do that, apparently. Number one way to apparently find a new podcast, I am told, is through friends and family, which means you need to start listening to podcasts because I can't tell you about my podcasts if you're not also
If I'm not
podcasting.
podcasting.
Yes, there's a give and a take here. So
Yeah.
you gotta free pushing to the other podcasts out there.
So that you can discuss what you heard on the podcast. That's
Yes,
the beauty of it all.
I love the economics of everyday things, and today's episode was on hand models.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't think my future's there, but I'm curious.
My future is not there either because I got that arthritic knuckle. But
There's
hey,
a commercial for that though.
if you that's true, I could probably do a drug commercial on shitty nails and arthritic knuckles. That's the ones working in the dirt. I'm always trying
It's all about casting.
always trying to clean them before videoing things and trying not to show fingers there because who knows what they look like. But I am mindful. Sorry if anybody's triggered by the gnarly nails. But I chew them, so that's how it goes.
That's our sign off.
Who needs nail clippers?
I have a pair if you want to borrow them.
Do you have an emery board?
Yeah, I do.
Wow. Okay.
Came with a kit,
Okay.
but I kept
okay.
it.
Then take your dude card away now. How's that for our episode of Toxic Masculinity? See all of you later.
Bye, everyone.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide. If discussions about donuts in the parking lot is what you came here looking for, well then my friend you're lost. It's 'cause our very human host Alex, we swear he's not a boss. Does he respect the cars a lot? He does perhaps too much, yes probably. But he'll help you find your ride here on the Auto Buyer's Guide.